This 87-year-old grandmother just walked into a courtroom and shocked everyone with what she did next. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ayanna Crowfeather shuffled through the metal detector, her weathered moccasins silent against the cold marble floor. The bailiff barely glanced up from his phone, waving her through with the casual indifference reserved for people he deemed unimportant. But what happened next would leave this entire courtroom speechless. It was supposed to be a simple hearing. The state wanted to build a new highway right through the sacred burial grounds of the Lakota people. Just paperwork, they said. Just signatures. Just another Tuesday in a system that had been grinding forward for centuries, treating indigenous voices like whispers in a hurricane. Judge Hamilton adjusted his reading glasses, his expression already showing the impatience of a man who'd made up his mind before the gavel ever touched wood. The corporate lawyers sat smugly at their polished table, briefcases full of environmental impact studies and legal precedents. And then there was Ayanna. No briefcase, no smartphone buzzing with notifications, no stack of documents 3 inches thick. Just an elderly Native American woman in a simple dress, carrying nothing but a small leather pouch that her great-grandmother had made over a century ago. Mrs. Judge Hamilton squinted at his papers, clearly struggling with her name. Crowfeather, she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of mountains. Right, Mrs. Crowfeather. I understand you're here to contest the highway development. Do you have your documentation? Environmental assessments? Historical surveys? The corporate lawyers exchanged knowing glances. This was going to be easier than taking candy from a child. Ayanna looked around the courtroom, at the suits, the ties, the tablets, the smartphones recording every word. Everyone waiting for her to fumble, to prove that she didn't belong in this world of legal jargon and bureaucratic maze running. No papers, she said simply. A ripple of barely concealed laughter ran through the corporate side of the room. Judge Hamilton sighed like a teacher dealing with a student who forgot their homework. Mrs. Crowfeather, without proper documentation. I'm afraid we can't. But I have something else, she interrupted, her dark eyes suddenly fierce as storm clouds. The room fell silent. I have memory. The judge looked confused, his pen hovering over his notepad like a bird that forgot how to land. Memory isn't admissible evidence, ma'am. We need surveys, historical records, official documentation. One of the corporate lawyers, a man whose tie probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, leaned forward with a shark smile. Your Honor, with all due respect to to the defendant, memories can be unreliable, especially, he paused, his eyes scanning Ayanna from head to toe, given her age and cultural background. The insult hung in the air like toxic smoke, but Ayanna didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward. You want to know about this land? She asked, her voice growing stronger with each word. You want documentation, historical records. She placed her weathered hand on the witness stand. I'll give you 700 years of documentation, 700 years of historical records, 700 years of environmental impact studies, and I'll do it without reading a single piece of paper. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear dust settling on the windowsills. Judge Hamilton blinked. I'm sorry, what did you say? 700 years, Ayanna repeated, her voice now filling every corner of the room. From 1324 to 2024. Every season, every flood, every drought, every birth, every death, every sacred ceremony held on that land you want to pave over. The corporate lawyers looked like they'd just watched their briefcases catch fire. And then Ayanna began to speak, not reading, not consulting notes, not checking her phone, speaking from a place deeper than memory, from the living oral tradition of her people, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, like a sacred flame that had never been allowed to die. In the year 1324, during the time of my ancestor Running Bear, the great flood came early. The waters rose 15 feet above normal, creating new wetlands that became home to the blue heron colonies. Her voice transformed the sterile courtroom into something alive, something breathing. 1347. The year of the dancing lights in winter sky. The aurora borealis came further south than ever recorded, and our medicine woman singing crow said it was a sign that the earth itself was showing us its power. Hour after hour, Ayana continued. She spoke of droughts that lasted 7 seasons, and rains that lasted 7 weeks. She told of the migration patterns of elk herds, the nesting cycles of eagles, the places where certain medicinal plants grew strongest. She recounted the treaties made and broken, the promises whispered and shouted, the ceremonies conducted in moonlight and starlight, on the very ground they wanted to destroy. The corporate lawyers' confident smirks faded like snow in spring sunshine. 1456. The year the white buffalo was born. Sacred to our people, a sign of abundance and spiritual renewal. The birthing ground was the eastern slope of what you now call Plot 47B. A court reporter who had been typing mechanically suddenly stopped, her fingers frozen over her keyboard, tears streaming down her face. 1523. First contact with European explorers. They promised to respect our sacred places. They promised to honor our ways. Judge Hamilton removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. 1781. The year of broken promises. When the first papers were signed, taking our children to schools where they were forbidden to speak our language, to remember our stories, one by one people in the courtroom began to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't just memory. This was a library, a living, breathing database of environmental science, anthropology, meteorology, and ecology that had been maintained not on servers or in books, but in the hearts and minds of indigenous grandmothers. 1847. The year they said our ways were primitive, our knowledge worthless. The year they told us to forget. A bailiff quietly removed his hat. 1923. When they tried to take the last of our sacred grounds, saying we had no documentations to prove our connection to the land. A corporate lawyer loosened his tie, suddenly finding it hard to breathe. And 2024, Ayana's voice rose like dawn breaking over mountains. The year they tried again. She turned to face Judge Hamilton directly. Your Honor, you asked for documentation. You asked for historical records. You asked for environmental impact studies. She gestured to her heart. I am your documentation. I am your historical record. I am your environmental impact study. Her voice filled with the power of 7 centuries. And every grandmother like me is a library they tried to burn. But we didn't burn. We remembered. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Hamilton stared at this elderly woman who had just delivered the most comprehensive land survey he'd ever heard, without consulting a single piece of paper. The corporate lawyers sat in stunned silence, their expensive legal degrees suddenly feeling like participation trophies. And then something unprecedented happened. The court reporter, a young woman named Sarah, who had been transcribing legal proceedings for 15 years, slowly rose from her chair, and she took a knee, not in defeat, but in recognition, in respect, in acknowledgement of something she had never encountered before. Wisdom so deep it made her own education seem like a puddle next to an ocean. One by one, others followed. The bailiff, who had barely glanced at Ayana when she walked in, knelt beside his post. A junior lawyer from the corporate team, his face red with shame, quietly lowered himself to one knee. Even Judge Hamilton, after 30 years on the bench, slowly removed his robes and joined them, because they finally understood. They weren't in the presence of someone without documentation. They were in the presence of someone who was the documentation. Living proof that some knowledge is too sacred, too vast, too important to be trapped in filing cabinets and computer servers. When Ayana finished speaking, 7 hours later, covering 7 centuries in meticulous detail, the courtroom remained in reverent silence. Judge Hamilton, his voice barely above a whisper, announced his decision. Development permit denied. These lands will remain under tribal protection in perpetuity.
But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was watching a room full of people realize that wisdom doesn't come with credentials, knowledge doesn't require certificates, and the most sophisticated database in the world was standing right in front of them, wearing moccasins and carrying stories in her heart, instead of data in her briefcase. The ending that changes everything. As Ayanna walked out of that courtroom, she moved differently than when she'd entered. Not because she had changed, but because everyone watching her had. They saw her now, really saw her, not as an obstacle to progress, but as progress itself, not as someone without documentation, but as living documentation, not as someone to be overlooked, but as someone to be revered. And maybe that's the lesson we all need to learn. In a world obsessed with credentials and certifications, sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. Sometimes the most sophisticated technology is a grandmother's memory. Sometimes the most important documentation is written not on paper but on hearts. Kiana Crow Feather walked into that courtroom as just another elderly Native American woman. She walked out as what she had always been, a keeper of memory, a guardian of truth, a living library. And everyone who witnessed her that day learned something they would never forget. Never underestimate the power of someone who remembers. Because in the end we are all just stories, and the people who carry those stories, they are the most powerful people in the world.